Hello viewers, and many thanks for joining us on the Allies Talk interview series. I'm Deji Ademola. Today on the program, we want to discuss Pan-Africanism and African unity in the last 60 years. What are the challenges of development for African countries, and why has Africa remained at the bottom of the pyramid? To look at these issues and many more, we are being joined on the program today by a senior research fellow and head, Division of African Politics and Integration, Nigeria Institute of International Affairs, Dr. Sharkdam, Wapmuk. Many thanks for joining us on the program today.
It's a pleasure.
Let's start our conversation by asking you, why have attempts at Pan-African unity been so problematic?
Well, the journey of Africans and Pan-Africanists as a whole through the years was aimed at actually achieving unity, bringing together African countries, African people under a platform so that we could actually forge ahead, especially against the backdrop of colonially divided boundaries and then all the kind of cracks we have had over the years that has tended to divide our people. Internally, we know how the politics look like, especially after independence. Even before independence, there were so many cracks. And this actually came to the surface immediately in the post-independence era. The journey towards independence in itself, we know how it was released. Most of the colonial powers would rather hand over power to a segment of the society that tends to, be favorable to them. So the ones that were seen to be less aggressive or less radical were kind of favored. Now you find out that within the various countries that eventually became, united post-independence African states, those countries also took maybe quote and unquote semblance of those kind of thoughts. Some were more radical in nature, some were not. And so when the Pan-African movement started outside the country, led by African Americans, with the consciousness that look, they have their roots from Africa. Of course, the movement started outside Africa, but a lot of Africans also joined it. And of course, some of ours, like Nandi Azikiwe, Awolowo, and so many others, likes of Nkrumah and Nyerere, were part and parcel of those who partook in some of these Pan-African congresses. Now, that raised a level of consciousness, and that consciousness was the need for unity, the need for solidarity, and the need to forge a project of unity before and even after independence. Now, after independence, most of these persons I have mentioned became almost automatic leaders of their countries. And then there was that need also to work together so that they could actually promote continental unity at the continental level. The shape which it would take now define the political Pan-Africanism. That there should be unity was not a question. It was agreed that yes, Africa needs to push ahead with the integration project. There was agreement that look, we need to be united. But the nature of unity the shape it should take now became an issue. Should we go the way of uniting our sovereignty, breaking up those barriers, and coming under the framework of a United States of Africa, as Nkrumah saw it? That's the federalist approach. Or should we now, get to understand ourselves first? Since we are coming from different backgrounds, we have some who were colonized by the British, some were by the French, some partly even by the Germany and the Germans, and later taken some by Portuguese. Language, ethnic backgrounds, the new leaders who have taken over all wanted to control their respective territories. Nobody wanted to give up the sovereignty. And so some were of the view that, look, instead of just hastening the integration project, why don't we get to understand ourselves? And some of them were referred to as the moderates. So on the one hand, were the Casablanca group, led by the likes of Kwame Nkrumah. On the other hand, was the moderates, led by the likes of our own Sir Abubakar Tafawa Balewa, which formed the Functional were leading the moderate group, or more or less referred to as the Monrovia group, who favor the functionalist approach, in which case we cooperate in some major areas of common interest first and get to understand and build incrementally on our successes, and eventually we move forward with the project. Why was it problematic? Because we are coming from different backgrounds, different understanding. I know countries were willing to give up their sovereignty so soon. Moreover, that mentality, that colonial mentality that people were imbued with, that look, they need that power to be able to achieve everything, was still there. And so having grabbed power, they were unwilling to let power go immediately at the post-independent era. But by and large, working together, eventually there was an understanding that look, they could go the middle ground, in which case the moderates had prevailed, and eventually the Organization of African Unity was actually formed by 1963 in Addis Ababa on the framework of functionalism, in which case integration African Unity was now to go through a gradual process of incremental building. Of course, eventually there was emphasis that also, why don't we erect where there was none? Why don't we also erect, put up regional integration schemes in various regions or sub-regions, so that they could serve as building blocks towards the overall continental project. As we progress in the discussion, you will see that there were other areas whereby, as African leaders meet, they try to come up with initiatives towards building on what they did in 1963, which was a way of solving the problematic of the nature of unity that should actually inform the post-independence era.
In 1958, Ghana hosted the first ever All Africa People's Conference,
Yes.
and which served as a rallying point for mobilizing ordinary Africans in the decisive struggle against for liberation across the continent and abroad. In 2018, it is exactly 60 years after. Do you think Africa has finished the business of liberation and transformation?
Well, if we conclude that Africa has actually finished the business of liberation, then we can actually be telling ourselves that all countries, or all territories, let's use that word, in Africa have actually been liberated. Well, at some point in time, I myself felt convinced that after South Africa achieved independence, with the enthronement of democracy and the election of Nelson Mandela as the first black majority leader, elected president in post-independent South Africa, that the project of liberation and the struggle against racism may have come to an end. But it appears that people seem to have forgotten that there are some territories, or at least one or two territories, that are still, to a very large extent, under some form of control. This time around, not even by external powers in the true sense. But we have the Sahrawi Democratic Republic within the very continent, under some form of control, not fully liberated. Yes, recognized by the African Union, recognized even as far back as the OAU, okay, which was a major issue, particularly in the 80s, and of course in the 90s, but recognized since the 80s by the OAU, now African Union. But even so, it has been a very thorny challenge getting mutual common position to move ahead with some form of referendum leading to absolute independence of Sahrawi Democratic Republic. Now, if we have this on our very soil in Africa, then how can we rightly conclude that we finished the liberation project in Africa? I think we have at least a territory to still liberate. Then we can tell ourselves we have concluded the liberation in Africa. You made reference to 58 and then now 2018. Well, it was at that time that even when after Ghana also became independent, Nkrumah made it very clear the independence of Ghana cannot be complete until and unless all other countries, he didn't say some countries, he said all other countries are fully liberated Now, liberation in its own understanding was not even just political liberation. It also extends to economic liberation as well. Of which, if we even go to that side completely, we can as well tell ourselves that we are not yet even liberated, because we still battle with those challenges. But at least at the level of political liberation, which is the major crux of the discussion, at least we can actually say that we are not fully completed that task yet. That is still an unfinished business before the African Union.
Okay, I agree with your statement about not being liberated economically so far, and I want to ask, why are African states still weak and dysfunctional even after achieving independence for very long years now?
Well, usually at some point in time, it was very common within us to always dismiss that, oh, we are very much at independent during the colonial era. The nature of the colonial state shaped African countries, its governance system, its economic systems, in such a way that liberation is virtually incomplete when you just have political independence. You have a system whereby even the nature of production, trade, at both the domestic, within the continent, as in the international market, puts these countries in a very weak position. Okay? And that is very true. The analysis has always been very true. But on the other hand again, we also need to look inwards to our own challenges. It appears that Africans have also undermined their own states and made them very weak. By this I'm referring to the aspect of governance especially. The quickest reference which I will point out is that most African leaders, after gaining power, assume power for power's sake rather than using it as an instrument of development, of transformation, and providing the good life to their own people. Using it as instrument to fight poverty, to ensure that there's they respect human rights, to address basic challenges that affect day-to-day living of their citizens. But rather you have a situation whereby by the time they want to stay long in power, they begin to tamper with the constitution, they begin to tamper with the political system, and of course we've seen the effects of this. Most times, or at least in the past especially, military always finds an excuse to intervene. And with every military intervention, it's been promises, oh, we are going to restore order. After order is restored, we will now leave the stage. By the time it is power to, they will leave the stage. This went on for a very long time, continued to undermine the state, and made it much more even weaker. And by the time we were approaching the 90s, early 2000, late 90s, early 2000, a lot of countries had gone far. The Asian powers, for instance, that were actually on the path practicing development planning and the like, working on their industrialization, working on their educational system, had gone far. So by the time we realized even we are still battling with usual problems, governance, conflicts trailing us almost all over, the world got tired of Africa. We started talking about Africa being neglected. Of course, we are really neglected. Responsibilities to protect was abdicated completely at the international level. It's their business to take care of your business. But really, by the time we open our eyes, other nations of the world have gone very far. The quickest example, which we make reference to in recent times, the likes of China, India, have really gone far. They are now become reference points. Majority of them who on the platform of South were almost at par. Many of them, including the Koreans, etc. You understand? We had already gone far. So why are we weak? We are still weak because we have not gotten basic priorities still right. Because what we could actually term as the minimum consensus or the minimum base which no country should go below, I don't think we have gotten it right. Leadership selection or leadership, you prefer to use the word selection because even if it's going to be by election, there is a system through which at least you prop up leaders. It's still the money bags that still get their way. Whether you and I still get to elect, well, is another story entirely. we talk about elections without even choosing. Well, we could go out to elections. The choice sometimes already made long before even we go to the polls. So key issues of governance. Then the developmental problems are not also being tackled. And by the time we create all sorts of contradictions at that level, the multiplier effect is that you have citizens that don't trust the state, and the state that also does not serve the needs of its own populace. So African countries continue to be weakened. And also, I've talked a bit about the domestic setting. Then there's a dimension of international politics too, where countries are always competing over who dominates or who has more strength, who has more power than the other. Whichever angle you pick it, whether at the level of just pure politics or the level of economics, you find out that countries always want to have an edge over the others. And so when you take it to the theater of economics, for instance, which is very key, very fundamental, where countries produce whatever they produce within their respective countries, the natural resources, which some add value, some don't add very little value, and how to trade on the international level. You find out that even the trading system is tilted against most of the developing countries, so that the control of the international market is by the developed countries. The same applies to the international financial institutions that provide loans and provide also policies to guide or protect whatever they may have also in quotes loaned you. We've seen that at play with the structural adjustment program, particularly in the late the early 80s all the way to the 90s, which was foisted by the international financial institution, particularly and the International Monetary Fund. It went a very long way in crippling most African states that a fair number have been unable to recover up to today. They tell you states have no role in states' business. The state has no business in controlling certain key sectors. You withdraw the role of the state so that the market can have its way. The story is another way when in their own countries. Take agriculture for instance. The EU still subsidizes agriculture up to today. But the same EU make recommendations to most of these governments in Africa telling you that if you subsidize agriculture, the state will not have enough resources for certain responsibilities. So you have to allocate education, do away with health, funding in health, funding in agriculture. Now when you withdraw this, we know the nature of the African setting. How far can we really go? And so we have a semblance of a state that is more or less that it's just there, okay? Of course, we have a government in power, but to a very large extent, it appears the control has an external hand in it more than just pure driven by the state, the people in the country themselves. So it's not absolute choice by those people within the country, but rather we have a very large extent, some control. Even our return to democracy, we've seen a lot of that. Merged government has withdrawn from certain sectors to a very large extent. Water is still a major player in education to an extent because there's always a fight with ASU and some other stakeholders that government needs to still have a hand in it. Else, I don't know whether government will have actually even withdrawn from that sector completely. And so where you say that user fees have to be introduced, almost how many persons can actually afford it. So these are actually some of the external hands that go a very long way in weakening the state. That goes a very long way in telling you why we have big states. So yes, the colonial dynamics went to a very large extent shaped the nature of African countries. We also have our domestic contributions. Particularly, I made reference to the nature of governance, which basically is not developmental. Africa is not, as far as I'm concerned, with the exception of maybe a few, we are not really promoting or actually gunning or aiming towards a developmental state. We are not yet there. We are not practicing same. We are not building one. We talk about transformational leadership sometimes only in words rather than in practice. Because if it's transformational, people begin to feel the effects and they can actually key in because they will feel the sense of vision, the direction the government is going, and they can actually key in. But here and now, by the time you go on the streets and interview one, two people about what is even going on, what is actually the direction of if our own government, they can know the word change, but the content of the change, I doubt if they'll be able to identify with it.